Today you will hear the testimony of Nadir Al-Hakim, a former respected imam in Medina, a man who seemed to have achieved everything: prestige, family, authority, and the reverence of his community. But behind that perfect facade, there was an emptiness that consumed him in silence. Nadir preached discipline, prayed with fervor, and defended ancient traditions, but within him grew a suffocating question. What if everything he believed in was not enough? The turning point began on a lonely dawn, when a click on Charlie Kirk's videos on the internet led him to unexpected messages about the Christian faith. That was the beginning of a story that would lead him to a miracle that would forever change his life. Get ready to witness how this religious leader became a fugitive under a death sentence, and at the same time, a man finally free. And before we dive into this overwhelming testimony, make sure you are already subscribed here to the channel, show your support with a like, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. That way, together, we can share stories that transform lives.
My name is Nadir Al-Hakim. I am 42 years old, and for a long time, my life was synonymous with blind obedience, rigid discipline, and a devotion that seemed unbreakable. I grew up in Medina, the second holiest city in Islam, a place where every stone, every street, and every call to prayer carried an almost tangible spiritual weight. For those who do not know, Medina is not just a geographic space. It is a universe of faith, tradition, and identity. I was practically born surrounded by religious chants, by the conversations of scholars, and by an atmosphere that seemed to breathe the Quran. From an early age, I learned that religion was not just part of life, but the very definition of what it meant to exist. There was no room for choice. My family did not see devotion as an optional path, but as the air we breathed. My father, a man known for his zeal, used to place his firm hand on my shoulder and say, "Nadir, Allah is with you, and you must never forget that your life is a calling, not a choice." I was only 5 years old when I first heard this, but it was like a seal that shaped my destiny. At 5 years old, while other children were still learning to play and run freely through the streets of Medina, I was already reciting entire surahs of the Quran from memory. The routine was marked by repetition, entire mornings of study, afternoons dedicated to the practice of proper intonation, entire nights of memorization. My mind was a machine in training. My small body endured hours sitting still, unable to move, because the expectation was that I would be not only a good Muslim, but an example, perhaps even a religious leader. I remember the sounds and smells of that time, the aroma of strong Arabic coffee that my mother prepared at dawn, the sound of birds even before sunrise, the sharp cold of the first ablutions when I washed my face with icy water. Everything seemed part of an inescapable ritual. My mother, a deeply devout woman, would put me to bed whispering verses. Not all of them I understood, but they burned into my mind like a branding iron. I fell asleep with the words of the Quran echoing inside me, as if they were invisible molds, shaping my soul in the direction my parents desired. When I turned 12 years old, my life took a definitive path. I was sent to a madrasa in Riyadh, one of the most prestigious religious schools in the country. The farewell was painful. I cried in silence, hiding my face from my father, because I knew he expected firmness from me. My mother hugged me tightly, and I remember the smell of her clothing soaked with tears. I knew I was leaving my family, but I believed it was for a sacred purpose. The journey to Riyadh was long, and every kilometer seemed to pull me away from who I was as a child and push me toward the role of leader they expected me to become. At the madrasa, the routine was relentless. We woke up before sunrise, performed ablutions, and dove into endless hours of study. The teachers were demanding, and any mistake in recitation could cost dearly. I saw classmates beaten severely for forgetting a verse. I saw tears rolling silently at night. But instead of surrendering to fear, I decided I would not show weakness. I wanted to be the best. And I was. At only 16 years old, I had already earned the nickname Al-Mumtaz, the Excellent. I could recite the entire Quran from memory, with perfect intonation, and even discuss jurisprudence with a confidence that surprised even the masters. I felt pride, but I also felt an enormous weight, the weight of never being able to fail, of always having to be the example. While many young people my age experienced doubts or rebellion, I grew stronger in the certainty that I was defending the only possible truth. I saw the West as a threat, as a poison, slowly trying to contaminate our faith. I saw Christians as deceived people, trapped in a lie that needed to be fought. In my mind, the world was clearly divided between the pure and the corrupted, between those who followed the truth and those destined for error. I believed with all my strength that my mission was to fight against this corruption. Years later, when I graduated in Islamic theology from the University of Medina, my status was already consolidated. I was no longer just Nadir, the son of Abdullah. I was a respected imam, someone the community listened to with reverence. The Prophet's mosque welcomed me as a muezzin, the one who calls the faithful to prayer, and shortly after I became an assistant imam. My sermons were fiery, full of conviction. People came from afar to hear my words. Men asked me for guidance, mothers entrusted me with the spiritual formation of their children. I was respected, consulted, almost venerated. My life seemed perfect when I married Lena, the daughter of a respected scholar. The marriage followed tradition, but there was mutual respect. Lena was discreet, submissive, devout. We had 3 children, and I raised them with the same discipline I had received. I wanted them to be pillars of tradition, examples of devotion. Over time, I gained even more authority when I was appointed to the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. It was a powerful position. We patrolled the streets, ensuring that religious law was enforced. I took pride in intercepting Christian materials that were sometimes smuggled in. To me, that was defending the purity of faith. I taught my students to refute Christian arguments without ever having even read the New Testament. I felt like a soldier of faith, fighting against Western corruption. On the outside, I was the portrait of devotion, a respected man, admired, feared. But inside, something was beginning to crack. I did not yet understand, but there was a discomfort, a silent emptiness growing within me. I tried to ignore it, tried to suffocate it with more discipline, more prayers, more study. But the desert inside me grew. The crisis became inevitable when I witnessed something that marked my soul forever. I was in Riyadh, attending a public execution. It was my duty to be there as a representative of the committee. The accused had been convicted of blasphemy. The square was crowded. I can still see the face of that man, the blade reflecting the sun, the tense silence of the crowd. I was there as an authority, as an example, but inside my heart was collapsing. When the sword came down and that man's life was extinguished, a question pierced through me like lightning. Is this the mercy of God? The phrase echoed inside me with a force that frightened me. I tried to get rid of it, tried to suffocate it, but it pursued me. It was as if every prayer I prayed was swallowed by emptiness. My prayers began to sound mechanical. I would bow, recite, lead the faithful, but leave the prayer the same way I entered it. Empty, cold, distant. What had once been unshakable certainty was now turning into silent doubt. I woke up at dawn with the sensation of being lost. I tried to double my devotion, fasted more, prayed more, studied more, but nothing filled the hole. I was a respected man, but internally collapsing. My face showed firmness, but my soul was in ruins. I could not understand it myself. It was as if everything I had built over my life was falling apart in my hands. And then came the night that changed everything. Tired, exhausted, I sat alone at home. The silence crushed me. I was too drained even to pray. That was when my eyes turned to the computer screen. I had access to a VPN I used to monitor forbidden sites, but that night I decided to use it differently. With a few clicks, I ended up reaching content I would never have searched for before. That is how I found videos of Charlie Kirk. It was strange for me to see a young Westerner speaking with such conviction about faith, values, and purpose. It was not just politics or culture. There was something deeper in his words. I did not know why, but they moved me. I felt as if someone had lit a flame where there had only been darkness. I remember that night exactly. I was sitting in front of the computer, the room immersed in silence while my family slept. The clock had already passed midnight, and even though I was tired, I could not close my eyes. The emptiness that had accompanied me for months seemed to suffocate me, as if I carried an entire desert inside. It was in that state that I decided to use the VPN I had to monitor sites considered forbidden. I had no idea that in that moment a simple click would open a crack that would change everything. In that random search, I came across videos of a man named Charlie Kirk. I had never heard of him before, but the title of one of the videos caught my attention. It was not about politics. It was not just about Western culture. He spoke of Christian faith, values, and testimonies of transformation. Part of me wanted to close the screen immediately, after all. For years I had condemned all of that. But another part, deeper and hungrier, made me keep watching. There was a different power in those words. They were not just arguments. They were not just well-constructed reasoning. It was as if there were life in those sentences. As he spoke, he quoted passages from the Gospel and shared stories of people who had been transformed by an encounter with Jesus. I told myself that it was absurd, that it made no sense. But at the same time, I could not take my eyes off the screen. Each word seemed to pierce the barriers I had built throughout my life. It was as if someone was speaking directly to me, inside my heart, revealing wounds I hid even from myself. When the video ended, I could not move. I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to search for myself, the source of those words. I typed Gospel of John in Arabic, and there in front of the screen, the scriptures I had fought against for so many years opened before me. My eyes ran over the first lines, and in just a few moments I felt something I had never experienced before. The words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," leapt off the screen as if they had been written for me. I read and reread, and the more I read, the more I felt as if an electric current were running through my body, not to hurt me, but to awaken me. I could not explain what was happening. It was as if my heart, until then suffocated, had finally found air to breathe. That simple phrase, repeated 1,000 times by Christians, but which for me had always been a reason for criticism, now resonated inside me as the most powerful revelation in the world. I was a man who had spent decades teaching that Jesus was only a human prophet, limited. But there, in front of the screen, I felt an unexplainable certainty that he was much more. For a few days, I continued in that rhythm. I fulfilled my duties as an imam during the day, led prayers, spoke before the community, but at night I would run back to the computer to dive into the texts that now fascinated me. I read the Gospel of John with a hunger I had never felt in my studies of the Quran. Each word seemed to speak to me in a personal, intimate, profound way. But even so, there was still resistance inside me. I wanted to believe, but I was afraid. Afraid of the consequences. Afraid to admit that everything I had taught until then was wrong. Then one night, something extraordinary happened. I was exhausted, lying in my bed but unable to sleep. The heat of Medina felt unbearable that night, and the distant hum of the air conditioner was not enough to bring me peace. I closed my eyes, trying to force sleep, but instead I was taken into an experience I cannot describe as just a dream. It was more real than anything I had ever lived. I saw myself in a desert. I recognized the place, the dunes, the endless horizon, the deep silence. But there was something different. The sky did not have the normal color of night, nor the bright blue of day. It was filled with an intense light that did not come from the sun, nor the moon, nor any natural source. It was a light that seemed to come from the very air, a light that enveloped me completely, but did not hurt my eyes. In the distance, I saw a figure approaching. It was a man dressed in a white robe so radiant it should have blinded me, but it did not. Each step he took made the desert seem more alive. When he came closer, I saw there were scars on his hands, and in that instant, without needing any explanation, I knew who he was. It was not a rational recognition. It was not the result of years of study. It was something deeper. My heart, my soul, everything in me was crying out the name I had spent my life denying. He was Jesus. I did not hear his voice with my ears. It was different. It was as if his voice went straight through my soul, filling every empty space inside me. He called me by my name. He said, "Nadir, I love you." Those 3 simple words fell on me like rain in the middle of the desert I carried within me, and then he completed, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." When I heard that, I felt my legs give way. It was not fear. It was something stronger. It was as if all my defenses, all my arrogance, all the weight of the traditions I carried collapsed at once. I fell to my knees, unable to stand before that presence. And there, kneeling with tears streaming down my face, I felt something I had never experienced. It was as if a weight of years had been lifted off my back. The fear, the coldness, the emptiness, everything disappeared. In its place there was peace, a peace that made no sense, a peace I could not explain, but that flooded every part of my being. I cried, but they were tears different from any I had ever shed before. They were not tears of pain or despair. They were tears of freedom, of forgiveness, of encounter. I did not deserve it, but even so he offered it to me. I did not understand everything, but I knew I was in the presence of something real, something that could not be denied. In that moment, I was no longer the respected Imam of Medina, no longer the rigorous scholar, no longer the man of the committee. I was just Nadir, a broken man, being embraced by the love of Jesus. The day after that vision, I woke up with my eyes still swollen from so much crying. The feeling was strange, as if I had crossed an invisible border during the night, and now was in a completely new place. The sun of Medina shone as always. The streets were full of voices and hurried steps, but everything seemed different to me. I still wore the same clothes, still carried the same title of Imam, still was seen as the same respected man by the community, but inside me something had changed. It was as if a new life was pulsing, and at the same time, a brutal conflict I did not know how to hide. That same day, I had the responsibility of leading the prayers at the mosque. It was my routine, something I had done hundreds of times. But when I entered that sacred space and felt the cold floor under my bare feet, a restlessness took over my entire body. The mosque was full. Worshippers lined up, ready to follow every word of mine, ready to repeat in unison the chants I was supposed to lead. The environment was filled with the reverent silence that always precedes prayer. I took a deep breath, adjusted my posture, opened my mouth to begin. But at that instant, the vision from the previous night returned with overwhelming intensity. I no longer saw only the walls of the mosque. In my mind, the illuminated desert reappeared, and that gentle yet firm voice echoed again. "I am the way, the truth, and the life." The words resonated inside me with such strength that I choked. I tried to regain concentration, mentally repeated the verses I had recited all my life, but the scars on his hands appeared before my closed eyes. It was as if my whole body was taken by that presence. I felt a battle happening inside me. On one side, obligation, discipline, the years of tradition. On the other, the living memory of Jesus calling me by name and saying he loved me. The seconds became eternal. The people behind me were waiting for the lead. Some coughed discreetly, others swayed impatiently, but I could not do it. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. And then, for the first time in my entire life, I could not bow toward the direction of Mecca. The weight was unbearable. Instead, my legs gave out, and I fell to the side, unable to complete the ritual. As the murmur of astonishment spread through the mosque, my mouth opened on its own, without me planning it. I whispered with tears streaming down, "Jesus, Son of God, I will follow you." Those words were not the result of reason. They were not rehearsed. They poured out like water from a dammed-up spring that finally broke. And at the instant they came out, something unexplainable happened inside me. It was as if invisible chains had been broken. For years, I had lived as a slave to duty, bound to rules, traditions, and expectations. My worth was in fulfilling every detail, in never failing, in always being the example. But in that moment, by declaring that I would follow Jesus, I felt a freedom I had never known. It was no longer about what I could do to be accepted by God, but about what He had already done for me. It was as if grace had passed through every layer of my soul, freeing me from the weight I had carried since childhood. I remained kneeling on the floor, unable to rise. The silence of the mosque turned into a confused murmur. I heard voices whispering, some full of reproach, others of disbelief. But none of that mattered. Inside, I knew something definitive had happened. I was no longer the same man. I stood up with difficulty, feeling my body light and heavy at the same time. I looked around and saw the faces of people trying to understand what had occurred. Some expressions were of shock, others of disapproval. I knew that this would be the first of many battles to come, but I also knew there was no turning back. Something had been sealed inside me. That night, back in my room, I relived every detail. I knelt beside the bed, not out of obligation, not out of ritual, but because my heart wanted no other position than to be prostrate before Him. The words came out again, this time firmer, clearer. "Jesus, Son of God, I will follow you no matter the cost." And that was when I realized that was the true miracle. It was not about a visible healing or a spectacular sign before the crowd. The miracle was the transformation from the inside out. It was seeing a hardened heart become tender. It was seeing a man enslaved by traditions become free by grace. It was feeling peace in the place where before there had only been emptiness. I cried like a child that night, but they were different tears. There was no fear. There was no despair. There was a deep joy, a peace I never imagined could exist. I knew that from that moment on my life would not be easier. On the contrary, I felt that the weight of consequences would come with force. But at the same time, there was inside me an unshakable certainty. I was no longer alone. When I rose from that night in which I finally spoke clearly that I would follow Jesus, my life was never the same. There was no bright sign flashing before my eyes, no plaque written, "Be careful, from here on your journey will be through fire." But inside me, I knew. I knew that it would not be just a moment of spiritual relief, but the beginning of a battle I could barely imagine. The miracle had happened. But every miracle brings consequences. I was still an imam. I still wore the same robes, still led the same rituals, still received the same looks of reverence from the community. But inside me, something was shouting. Something was pulsing and telling me at every moment that I could not live that lie forever. The weight of the secret was crushing. I lived as two people in the same body. During the day, I fulfilled the rites with the composure expected of me. I recited the words everyone waited to hear, and I smiled when surrounded by men and women asking for advice and blessings. But when night came, when the doors closed and silence filled the air, I ran to the texts of the Gospel. I read John. I read the letters of Paul. I read and reread every word as one who has insatiable hunger and thirst. I spent hours in the early morning praying in secret. They were not the long repetitions I had practiced all my life. They were simple, spontaneous words, often just tears and sighs. But they were real. It was different. It was like speaking to someone who was truly present, there with me, hearing every word, every groan of my soul. I felt the presence of Jesus in a way I could not describe to anyone. He embraced me in the silence of the night, and that was what gave me strength to face the obligations of the next day. But that double life began to leave marks. Lena, my wife, was the first to notice. She saw my distance, noticed that something in me had changed. Before I was rigid, inflexible, demanding in every detail of faith. Now, many times, she caught me distracted, lost in thought, staring into the emptiness. I still fulfilled my roles as husband and father, but she felt that there was a part of me in another place. And that part, she could not reach. She asked me if I was sick, if something worried me, if I was hiding some problem. I denied it, but deep down I knew. She sensed the transformation I was trying to hide. My community, however, still saw me as the same firm leader. For them, I continued to be the man who carried tradition like a sharp sword, ready to defend the faith from any threat. But the truth is that my sermons no longer had the same flame. What once seemed conviction now sounded like a prison to me. I spoke of duty, of law, of discipline, but inside my heart was crying out for grace, for life, for the freedom I had found in Jesus. Every time I climbed the pulpit, I felt I was living a lie. And that burden grew every day until it became unbearable. It was on one of those occasions that everything exploded. I was in a theological debate with some students and other leaders. The discussion revolved around the figure of Isa, as we called Jesus in the Quran. Someone asked why Christians insisted on calling him the Son of God. I should have answered with the same arguments I had repeated for years, those that were engraved in my mind. But something in me did not allow it. I took a deep breath, and unable to hold back, the words slipped out of my mouth. He is the Son of God. He is the way, the truth, and the life. The silence that followed was more deafening than any shout. I felt the stairs burning on me, felt the heavy air, felt the ground almost disappear beneath my feet. No one knew how to react. Some students stood with mouths agape, others immediately got up, and then came the first accusations. Apostasy. I had betrayed the faith. I had crossed the line no one could cross. The news spread like fire on dry straw. In just a few hours, the whole city seemed to be talking about what I had said. I was summoned to give explanations. There was no turning back. I knew that to deny it now would be to live the rest of my life as a coward. So I maintained my confession. I said clearly, Jesus is the Son of God. He is the truth. That was enough to seal my fate. I was arrested in my own home before the eyes of Lena and the children. I will never forget her look. There was anger, there was pain, there was also a shadow of deep fear. To her, I had gone mad. I had abandoned everything sacred. To my children, I had become a stranger. I was taken through the streets in handcuffs, while neighbors whispered. Some looked at me with disdain, others with sadness. I had become an enemy of the very people who once revered me. In prison, the interrogations began. At first, they tried to convince me to go back. They promised that if I denied those words and repented, everything could be forgotten. But how could I deny what I had seen, heard, and felt? I could not betray the one who had called me by name. Then came the tortures, physical and psychological. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to admit that it was a mistake, a momentary weakness. But even through tears and pain, I repeated, Jesus is the Son of God. The trial was swift and relentless. Scholars gathered, religious leaders delivered fiery speeches, and in the end, the sentence was announced, death for apostasy. They gave me a few days to reconsider, as tradition demanded. But in my heart, there was no reconsideration. There was peace in the middle of the storm. It was during that waiting period that something unexpected happened. My younger brother Karim managed to visit me. He was different from me, more flexible, more open to dialogue. For years he had admired me, but he also questioned me in silence. When he saw me in that cell, thin, wounded, but with steady eyes, something in him was shaken. I told him about my vision, about the voice of Jesus, about the peace I felt even in the face of the sentence. Karim did not say much, but I saw in his eyes that a seed had been planted. A few days later, when I was already preparing for martyrdom, Karim reappeared. He had risked everything to organize an escape plan. He used contacts, paid people, and told me, "You are not going to die here. There is still purpose for your life." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to accept death as the final testimony, but another part remembered the words I had heard, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I knew there was still something to be fulfilled, so I accepted. That night, under the dark cloak of the desert, we began the escape. Every step was a risk, every shadow could hide an enemy. We crossed endless dunes, guided only by the moon and by instinct. At every moment my heart cried silently, "Jesus, guide us." I had nothing left, only faith. Lena had abandoned me. She told the children that I was dead. That was the most heartbreaking pain of all. Losing my wife, my children, my home. It was as if part of me had been torn away. But at the same time, I felt inside me his living presence, sustaining my steps, giving me strength to go on. And in the middle of that desert, between freezing nights and scorching days, I had long conversations with Karim. He asked me questions, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in silence. I spoke of the love I had felt, of the freedom I had found. And I saw in his eyes the same restlessness that had once grown in me. The desert was not just the path of escape. It was the place where a seed was planted. Years later, I learned that seed had sprouted. Karim, that brother who had risked everything to save me, also found Christ. And that was when I realized the greater twist. What seemed to be the end of my story, what seemed to be only loss and tragedy, became the beginning of a legacy. What looked like the destruction of my family was actually opening the way for new branches to be born. When I finally arrived in Amman in Jordan, after crossing endless nights in the desert, I was no longer the same man who had left Medina. I carried in my heart deep scars, the loss of my family, the public shame, the marks of prison and torture, but at the same time, an unquenchable flame burned inside me. It was there, in a simple place, that I was welcomed by a small group of Christians. Among them was Rami, a man who would become more than a friend, almost a brother. He did not look at me with fear, nor with suspicion. His eyes reflected compassion and hope, as if he already knew that this was just the beginning of my true journey. In his arms I found refuge, but it was in the Word that I found life. With insatiable hunger, I dove into the Bible like someone who had crossed a desert and finally found fresh water. I spent hours reading, rereading, underlining, weeping over every page. I discovered truths that had been hidden from me my entire life. I discovered that grace was not earned by human effort, that forgiveness was not bought with works or merits, but received through faith in Christ. Every verse seemed to whisper directly to my heart, "You no longer need to carry this weight. I have already carried it for you." There were months of discipleship, entire nights of prayer, fasting and tears, but also of joy, of freedom, of rebirth. And when the danger of being discovered grew, I was sent to Europe with a new identity. There, in distant lands, I began to dream again. I founded the ministry I called Beacon in the Desert. That name was born because I knew that many, just like me, were lost in the middle of darkness, thirsty for a light to guide them to freedom. Through this ministry, I began to produce content, record messages, and support persecuted former Muslims who had also found Jesus. Little by little, the testimonies began to multiply. I saw men and women who had lived under fear lift their heads in courage. I saw tears turn into smiles, More than 2,000 Muslims gave their lives to Christ through the work God entrusted to my hands. And that was how I realized. The pain that had torn me apart became a bridge for thousands. I lost almost everything: wife, children, honor, home. But through my surrender, many found life. And even today, with longing and painful memories, I can say without hesitation, no heart is too closed for Christ not to open. Neither a rigid religious system, nor a death sentence, nor the rejection of one's own family can stop the grace of God. My life is proof of that. I am not a hero. I am not an extraordinary man. I am only someone who was reached when everything seemed lost. If before I carried invisible chains, today I can declare, true faith is not in human achievements, but in the real encounter with Jesus. He is enough. He is life. And even paying the highest price, even with the losses I will never forget, I can repeat with conviction, everything I lost does not compare to what I gained in Christ.
Now, I want to speak directly to you who stayed until this point. Maybe, while listening to Nadir's testimony, something also stirred inside your heart. Maybe you carry old wounds, doubts, an emptiness that no tradition or achievement has ever been able to fill. The good news is that the same Jesus who called Nadir by name is also calling you right now. And if deep in your heart you desire to take this step of faith, make this declaration out loud, right where you are. I accept Jesus as Lord and Savior of my life. To make this public and take the first step before our community, write this message in the comments. I accept Jesus. And if this testimony spoke to you, do not forget. Subscribe to the channel now. Activate the notification bell to receive the next videos, and leave your like, because this helps us reach even more people with messages of hope and transformation. And if you made it this far with me, also write in the comments the phrase, I love Jesus, because this simple confession has the power to encourage many others to take the same step. And do not forget, your journey of faith does not end here. The next video is already appearing on your screen, and in it you will hear an even more impactful story, that of a woman who was forced to marry at 8 years old to a sheikh, but who, just like Nadir, found in Charlie Kirk's videos an unexpected bridge to Jesus. Get ready, because this story will shake your heart and rekindle your faith even more. Click now and come with me to the next testimony.